Now, in order to make our form work, the first thing that we need to do is to add the ability of the user selecting a friend. So whenever we click here on select, it will then open up the form with the information about this user. So here is the name of the user, and yeah, well, that's really all that we need. And then here you also see that the selected friend is marked here with this orange background, and the button text changes to close. And then if we click on another one, then the information of this friend is passed in here. So basically what we want is that whenever we click select on one of the friends here in this list component, we want that information to pass here into this form component. So how do we do that? Well, basically we want this component right here, so this friend component, we want it to communicate with this form component, right? So to basically pass it some data. But as we can see here in our own component tree, those are actually sibling components. And actually even worse than sibling components, because the friends are inside the friend list, and friend list itself is then a sibling component of the form. But in any case, since these two now need to share some state, so basically they need to share this friend object that was selected here, we need again some lifted up state. And so the first common parent is again the app component. And so let's in here create a new piece of state called selected friend. And then set selected friend. And here by default, we will have null. So basically no object at all, which means that no friend is selected. And now let's start using this new piece of state here, because when there's no friend selected, which is currently the case, since this is null, then we don't even want this form here to show up, right? So let's go here into our JSX and let's conditionally render this form. So based off the state, let's say selected friend and then the form. So right now selected friend is null, and so the end operator will short circuit and will not display anything. And so then it's gone. Great. So we created the state, we used it already a little bit, and now we need a way of updating it. And so that, of course, is going to happen whenever this button here is clicked. So let's actually create a handler function, again, right here in the component that actually owns that state. So a function that we will then pass down via props, as we have been doing also with the other functions. So let's call this one handle the selection. And so this one should receive a friend object. So all this will do is to set the selected friend to the friend object that it will receive. All right. And so this is the function that will get called whenever we click on this button. And so then whatever button is clicked, the associated friend object will be set as the currently selected friend. All right, so let's pass that down. And here this is getting a bit confusing. Let's just add some spacing between all of these. And so let's pass, let's say on selection will be handled with handle selection. Okay, and now in the friends list, we need to receive that. So on selection, but it is actually not even this component that needs this, but the friend itself. So here we can just pass it through this component by saying on selection as a new prop here should then be passed here into the friend. All right, and so now this is where we will use this function. So that's right here on this button. So on click, and then let's specify our function here because we want to call now, well, not this. So we want to call on selection and pass in the current friend. And that's it. So whatever button here is now going to be clicked, it will take the current friend and it will save it into the selected friend state. So that's the same logic as before with some lifted up state. Then we create a handler function which updates that state, and then we pass that handler function down via props. And so now when we click here, that should actually immediately open up the form. And indeed, it does. All right. Now there's still some things missing, but this is already great. Now what we need to do next is to then actually pass that selected friend object here into the form, so that then here we can display the correct name. So that doesn't sound too difficult. And so it's right here. So selected friend should be equal to selected friend. Then let's come down here. Let's receive that selected friend, and then we can use that here. So selected friend.name, and immediately you see Sarah there. So that's great. Let's just use it here in the other places. So that's right here and right here. Nice. And if we click another one, watch what happens. Yes, it changes to Anthony or to Clark or whatever other friends that we have in our list. Beautiful. So that's working already really nice. Now the next step is to then basically mark this one here also as selected and change the button text here to close. So just as we have here. So you see that here we have this nice background, and yeah, the text has changed as well. So how do we know inside of each friend if it is currently selected? Well, first of all, we will have to pass in the currently selected friend. And so then we can compare that with each friend. So with the friend itself. But that's easier to understand in code. So, as I said, let's come here into the app and let's pass the currently selected friend in as well. So selected friend equals selected friend. And now as we save, Prettier puts each of these props into its own line. So this makes it a lot easier to see what's going on here. But anyway, the friends list now receives the selected friend. So let's add that here. And then once again, we don't need that directly here in the list, but we will need it inside the friend. So we just pass that through here. Selected friend equals selected friend. And by the way, whenever this happens, so whenever we have a component that doesn't actually need the prop, but all it does with the prop is to pass it down into one of its children, we say that we are prop drilling. So in this case, that's not a big problem, but sometimes we need to pass some prop through like 5 or 6 levels. And so then it becomes really problematic, and we then need to solve that problem. But here, that's no issue. I just wanted to already prepare you for what's ahead, basically. So at some point we will talk about that in detail. But anyway, now here we can compare that selected friend with the current friend, basically. So let's say is selected. And so here we want a Boolean. And so we can simply do selected friend.id equal to friend.id. And that's it. So now we can use this to conditionally define a class name here. And here, let's now use JavaScript mode again, so that we can say is selected, then add the class of selected, and if not, then no class at all. All right, and you see, well, actually, you don't see. This is the demo app. but you see it here. So this already got now the nice background color. And if we select this one, then it changes here to this other friend. And so that's simply because this ID here of this friend is now exactly the same ID of the one that we have selected. And now all we need to do is to change that text there for closing. And so that's down here. So is selected, and if so, it should be close, and otherwise select. And yeah, there it is. Great. So that's working, but what's not working is that when we click here again, is that this is not closed. And that makes sense because nowhere we are saying that when we click here again, that the state should be back to null. And so that's what we need to do next. So here where we handle the selection, basically when there is already a friend selected, so which means that this here is open, then when we click here again, we want to change the selected friend back to null. So back to the initial state, basically. And so here now we need to do something else. Let's just comment it out. And so now this will actually depend on the current state. So let's just call this the selected. So the currently selected here in this callback is just called selected so that we don't have to write so much. Then here we can say if the selected.id is equal the friend.id that we're passing in, then let's set it back to null. And otherwise, then set it to the passed in friend. All right, so whenever the currently selected, let's actually change this here to cur, which stands for current. So if the currently selected.id is equal to the friend.id, so the friend that is passed in, then that means that it is actually open. So that right now the form is being displayed. So in that case, we want to actually close it. And so then we set it back to null. Right? So let's try that. And, well, we got a bug. So let's see what that is. And yes, this is what I was expecting. So we cannot read the properties of null right here in the friend. So right here. And so that is because right now the selected friend is null, isn't it? And so on null, we do not have the ID property. And so therefore, then this breaks. But fortunately for us, in modern JavaScript, we have optional chaining. And so this is very easy to solve. And if you're not familiar with the syntax, then just go back to the section where I review essential JavaScript. Now here this friend will always exist. And so here we don't need optional chaining. So we will never run into problems there. But let's do the same up here as well. Because again, the currently selected does not always exist. I mean, sometimes it's null, and then this doesn't work. Okay, so we select it, then we select this, and if I click again, which is what we just implemented, then beautiful. The form disappeared, we have no bugs here, and everything is back to normal. Great. And now, just to finish, let's handle one small edge case. So let's say that we decided to add a friend, but then for some reason we don't. We're not interested anymore in this. And then we click here to open up this form. So then we have both of them open at the same time, which looks a bit weird. And so let's automatically close this form here whenever we open this one. And so this will then again show you the huge power of state. So all we need is one line of code right here where we handle this click. So all we have to do here in handle selection is to select the friend first, and then we set show at friend always to false. So let's reload that. So I open the form, then I select Anthony, and so that closes this one and opens the one that we're interested in. Great. And with this, we are now ready to actually make this form here dynamic right in the next video.